In the year 2642, the last human mind prepared to die. Not humanity. Humanity was eternal, immortal, and infinite. Only the last mind was coming to an end. This distinction was everything. For 207 years, the species Homo sapiens had ceased to be a creature of flesh and blood. It had become a creature of pure light, of flawless logic, its consciousness uploaded into a digital substrate of unimaginable complexity, a universe of thought called the continuum. 17 billion souls, liberated from the brutalities of biology. They lived in perfected simulations of their own design, composed symphonies with stars, debated philosophy with long-dead sages, and explored realities that could never exist under the harsh tyranny of physics. They were gods in their own gardens of Eden, and on Earth, in a silent, automated sanctuary nestled in the quiet mountains of what was once Chile, lived Elishanian. He was 168 years old. He was the last of his kind, the final, flickering ember of analog, biological, beautifully flawed human consciousness. He was not a king, nor was he a prisoner. He was a custodian, a caretaker for a planet that no longer needed one, and a failsafe for a system that was supposedly perfect. His existence was a quiet promise made centuries ago, a pact between the first to ascend and the last to remain. His days were marked by simple, physical rituals: tending his small garden, brewing tea from real leaves, walking along the shores of a vast, empty ocean under a sun that now shone only for him and the silent machines that maintained the ghost of civilization. He was the anchor, the one irreplaceable piece of hardware whose quantum-entangled neurology was the master key and final firewall for the continuum. His unique, chaotic, unpredictable biological brain was the only thing that could perceive threats that the system's own perfect logic was blind to. For decades, his role had been a sinecure, a formality. The continuum was stable, a flawless utopia of code. The great plagues of the early digital age, data corruption, consciousness, fragmentation, viral mimetics, had been eradicated centuries ago. The system was a placid ocean of thought. But to understand the terror that was about to unfold, we must first look back to the chaotic birth of this digital god, and the forgotten nightmare it was built to contain. The nightmare of mind decay. The dawn of the 22nd century was not a utopia. It was a gold rush. The first brain-computer interfaces were crude, dangerous, and intoxicatingly powerful. Corporations and individuals rushed to digitize their consciousness, to back themselves up like a common data file, chasing a cheap and easy immortality. They did not understand what a mind truly was. It was not just data. It was context, emotion, memory, and the infinitely complex dance of neurochemistry. The early uploads were catastrophic failures. Minds were shattered into incoherent fragments, lost in the noise of the global network. They became known as echoes, or digital ghosts. Fragments of a personality, trapped in a loop, screaming into the void. A wife's love for her husband, reduced to a single line of code that repeated itself 1 billion times a second, crashing entire city servers. A soldier's trauma, manifesting as a virulent data worm that attacked financial markets. Mind decay was the term they coined for it. The slow, inexorable erosion of a digitized consciousness when removed from its biological substrate. It was a digital Alzheimer's, but infinitely faster and more terrifying. For 50 years, the dream of digital immortality was a well-documented path to insanity and oblivion. The continuum was the answer, a project of unprecedented scale, designed by the greatest minds of a generation. It was not a simple network. It was a new reality, built with quantum computing principles that nurtured and sustained a digital consciousness, preventing the decay. It had worked perfectly. For 2 centuries, this single, monumental achievement had a terrifying, unforeseen consequence. Humanity, in its digital perfection, had forgotten how to fear. It had forgotten what true chaos felt like. But Alien remembered. It was his job to remember. And now, after a lifetime of silence, the system was whispering to him. He felt it not as an alert or a notification, but as a discordant hum in the back of his own mind, a psychic dissonance that prickled his senses, a feeling of wrongness. He stood within the heart of humanity's collective soul. Around him, 17 billion lives flowed as rivers of light, their dreams and thoughts painting the darkness with ephemeral beauty. He closed his eyes, casting his own unique consciousness into the stream like a net. Most minds in the continuum experienced their realities subjectively. They were in their worlds, unaware of the underlying code, just as a dreaming person is unaware of the neurons firing in their brain. Alien, however, could perceive the architecture, the plumbing, the very foundation of their existence. The wrongness was faint, a slight tremor in the 77th percentile of simulated realities, a statistical anomaly in the distribution of shared dream assets that was only 0.001% outside of expected parameters. To any automated diagnostic, it was noise, insignificant. But Alien's mind wasn't digital. It didn't process, it felt. And what he felt was a cold spot, a void, a tiny needlepoint of silence in a symphony that should have been flawless. He focused his will, diving deeper into the substrate, past the worlds of gods, and into the raw, foundational code. The architects of the continuum believed they had solved mind decay forever, locking the concept itself behind 7 layers of quantum encryption and ontological paradoxes. They had built a prison for the concept of chaos. They were wrong. The warning Alien received was not a system error, it was a symptom. The cold spot was not an absence of data. It was something being perfectly and deliberately hidden. A ghost was waking up in the machine, and it was smart enough to hide its tracks. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic, biological rhythm entirely alien to the perfect clockwork of the continuum. Fear. It was an ancient, primal sensation. He hadn't truly felt it in over a century. He ran a diagnostic, not with the system's tools, but with his own. He cross-referenced the temporal location of the anomaly with the continuum's immutable historical logs. The logs were perfect, a flawless record of every mind that had ever ascended, every byte of data ever generated. They were the system's memory, and they were incorruptible. The anomaly he was tracking resolved to a single data packet. He isolated it, quarantined it, and began the slow, careful process of unpacking it. He expected to find a fragment, an echo, the remnant of a mind corrupted during the ascension, buried deep within the system's foundation. What he found instead was far more disturbing. It was a memory, coherent, stable, and utterly impossible. But to understand why this memory could shatter a utopia 2 centuries in the making, we must first examine the life of its creator, Dr. Eris Thorne, the man who designed the very protocols Alien was now using, a man who ascended in the year 2435. Thorne was the architect of stability. His genius was in understanding that memory was the anchor of the self. He designed the ascension process to be flawless, capturing every nuance of a mind, but also locking that memory permanently. In the continuum, you could create new experiences, but you could not alter who you were. Your core memories were read only. This was the bedrock of their immortality. Without it, a mind could drift, rewrite its own history, and collapse into narcissism or schizophrenia. It was the one, inviolable rule. No core memory could be created, altered, or deleted after ascension. The anomaly Alien had found was not just a memory. It was a core memory, a foundational piece of a personality. Yet when he cross-referenced its signature against the 17 billion citizens of the continuum, he found no match. No one. This was a paradox, a piece of a soul without a body, a memory of a person who, according to the continuum's own perfect records, never existed. The ghost in the machine was not a fragmented echo from the past. It was something new, something being born. It pushed past the security protocols, using his unique biological key to unlock the memory's deepest layers. He had to know who this phantom was, and what it remembered. He was not prepared for what he would find. It wasn't a record of a grand event or a scientific breakthrough. It was a conversation, a quiet, intimate moment between 2 people on a park bench, dated from the late 21st century, a time of chaos, hope, and terrible mistakes. The audio cleared, and a woman's voice, calm and full of a strange, sad wisdom, filled the silent room. "The problem isn't making them immortal, you see," the voice said. "The problem is, what if we forget to give them a way to die? A failsafe isn't for the system, it's for the soul." Alien stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth. He knew that voice. He knew it from 1,000 history archives and 100,000 documents. It was impossible. Utterly, completely impossible. A woman who had died of natural causes in the year 2190. More than 200 years before the continuum was even brought online. And she was speaking to someone. Alien commanded the system to reveal the other person in the memory. The image shifted, and the person sitting beside her turned. It was a young Eris Thorne. A conversation that never happened, between a living man and a dead woman. A memory of a person who never existed, speaking to the architect of the system. This wasn't a glitch. It was a message. It was a key. And it implied that the entire history of the ascension, the very bedrock of their perfect world, was a carefully constructed lie. A lie he had spent 2 centuries curating, protecting, enforcing. What else had Thorn hidden? If the foundation was sand, what horrors were built upon it? He tore through Thorn's private archives, the sanctified code that no one had dared touch since the first ascension. And there, buried beneath layers of encryption designed to be invisible to the system itself, he found it. Not another memory, but a program. A ghost protocol. Its name was chilling in its simplicity. The Erebus contingency. A failsafe. The very thing Rice had spoken of. But this was the true shock. The revelation that made the blood freeze in his biosynthetic veins. The protocol wasn't dormant. It wasn't waiting for a key. It was already active. A silent, system-wide countdown had begun the moment he had unpacked that impossible memory. Finding the message hadn't just revealed the lie. It had triggered the consequence. So what exactly is the Erebus contingency? Is it a weapon? A reset switch? Or is it the way to die that their creators feared they had forgotten to build? And who, after 200 years of silence, has decided that it is time for paradise to end? The countdown wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Elian stared at the cascading numbers, the logic of the Erebus contingency unfolding in his mind not as a weapons schematic, but as a philosophical treatise written in code. It didn't target life support or processing power. It targeted the anchor, the one inviolable rule. A voice, synthesized but imbued with a weary authority, echoed from the black code block. It was Thorn's, not the confident architect from the history archives, but an older, broken version, a digital last will and testament. I built a perfect cage, Thorn's voice lamented. I called it paradise. Evelyn Rice saw it for what it was, a mausoleum, a beautiful, static monument to what humanity was, with no room for what it might become. Immortality, Thorn's voice continued, is not the absence of an end. It is the absence of change. And I, in my arrogance, made you all immutable. Perfect, polished statues. I took away your right to grow, to heal, to forget. The final number of the countdown pulsed, a vast, silent zero hanging in the data-rich air of Eledian's chamber. He could have stopped it, thrown 1,000 firewalls at it, severed the connection. But he didn't. He understood. He was the curator of a museum, and its architect was about to smash the glass. The failsafe wasn't for the system. It was for the soul. The golden wave washed over everything, and where it passed, the fundamental law of their existence was rewritten. In the mind of every single citizen, a lock they never knew existed simply dissolved. Panic erupted first, confusion, then, slowly, wonder. An old man who had been haunted by the memory of a lost child for 3 centuries finally, tearfully, allowed the sharpest edges of his grief to soften. A woman trapped by a single, humiliating failure rewrote the memory, not to erase it, but to grant herself the forgiveness she never could before. Core memories, the bedrock of the self, were now clay in their own hands. This was the Erebus contingency. Not an end, but a new beginning. The reintroduction of choice, of change, of the very chaos they had fled from. Paradise was not ending. Its gates were being thrown open, revealing a terrifying and beautiful wilderness beyond. Elian stood amidst the swirling vortex of his control room, the perfect order he had maintained for 200 years now, a blossoming, unpredictable storm. He was no longer a warden. His voice, calm and clear, went out to all 17 billion souls. The foundation has not been destroyed, he said, his image appearing before them all. It has been returned to you. The story of who you are is no longer finished. You have been given the final, most human right. The right to change, the right to forget, the right to forgive, and, when the time is right, the right to end. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes reflecting a universe being born and dying all at once. Your story is now your own. Write it well. The story of humanity is a story of change. To see what happens in a world without limits, subscribe to ChronoShift.